You're watching 7th Circle Gaming, and today on the channel, let's talk about the game Thymesia. And we'll get started here in just a second with full disclosure. Pause the video now, like I always say, and read through these at your leisure, or if you prefer not to, we'll move right on to the screenshots. And the first one is meant to illustrate what the game world itself looks like and what the player character looks like, the overall game design, and the minimalistic nature of the user interface. There's only two items that we really see. Anything else is something like a pop-up or a targeting system. Now, what we are seeing as far as the game design is a kind of Victorian era fantasy world, although the game world does change somewhat significantly from that, so the only real thing to take from this is the character design, which seems to be inspired by the plague doctors of the 14th century. And on that note, we're going to move right along to our second screenshot, which is the player upgrade tree, and it illustrates one of the major changes that the game makes to the typical combat model, that being the plague weapons, which, well, anyone who does play through the game is going to become aware of fairly quickly. And now, with that said, let's move on and start compiling into scores before we start giving away spoilers. And in its immersion score, Thymesia is earning a 7.5 out of 15. The primary driver of that score is the combat. It is fairly fast-paced, with a unique challenge that we'll get into a little bit more later when we start being highly subjective. And the game is also going to attempt to use presentation to get players invested into the game world. As we saw in that first screenshot, the presentation is the third person, and we are seeing some elements that we would call Victorian or 14th century Europe. At least in the character design, it does seem to be reminiscent of 14th century Europe. And there is a fair amount of player agency on offer in Thymesia, although that often takes the form of choosing an upgrade path for the player character. And in addition, the game is going to attempt to use audio to get players invested into the game world. But primarily what we noticed in all of our evaluation sessions with the game is that this is only in the form of combat noises. We didn't notice anything else particularly noteworthy as far as audio was concerned. So then, let's move on, and we're going to talk about difficulty. Thymesia is earning a 1 out of 15 for difficulty. It really only has one difficulty setting, and the control setup is pretty typical. We didn't find any controls that were utterly terribly unusual or overly complicated. Holding shift, control, whatever, overly complicated that would require 3 hands to successfully complete. It does claim to be usable with a gamepad or keyboard and mouse. However, at least during our evaluation sessions, we did find that it took at least 4 attempts to get through one of the earlier encounters with a keyboard, but only took 1 with a gamepad. So take that for what it's worth. And it's really worth only a handful of salt. So then, let's move on to Lasting Appeal. And in Lasting Appeal, this game is earning a 4 out of 15. At present, it lacks mod support or downloadable content, though that could change as the game develops. There are some changes to the combat system that players might find frustrating. And it does need approximately 10 minutes of play for progress to be observable by the player. Players could play for less time and see a little less, or they could play for a bit longer and see some more progress. But It did seem like 10 minutes was the standard. Now, it is a story-based game. From what we found, the only real changes possible were the order of unlocks. So it is possible to play through the game in a challenge run and try different weapons. So that could drive the player trying the game multiple times. And so the game is earning a 4 out of 15 for lasting appeal. And on that note, we'll move on to the overall score. Overall, Thymesia is earning a 4 out of 15. And our next couple of statements are going to be highly subjective, so grains of salt, actually a mountain of salt for this one. And let's get started. First of all, it did seem like there was some self-immersion required from the player. The game wasn't going to necessarily reach out to the player, apart from the combat, that is, and draw the player into the game world. It could be called Bloodborne for Windows. Mostly that is based on the character design and the general world design. At least for the first part of the game, it really does seem to be reaching for that. Additionally, the combat changes might not be welcomed by all of the players, and before I continue, I will warn you, here be spoilers, so fingers in your ears and sing the La La song or whatever. One of the major changes that Thymesia makes is all of the characters in the game, both player character and any of the enemy characters, do seem to have what we could, if it was a fiction game, call a shield that players must first deplete before they can actually do damage to the health pool of any of the characters. And that's going to be where the special weapons come in, because they really do assist with making sure that that shield stays depleted. And finally, no more spoilers from this point on, so take your fingers out of your ears and you can stop singing the song. Thymesia could be said to be attempting to mesh the spectacle fighter or character action game with the typical Dark Souls formula. So, that if that is something that the player is particularly interested in, Thymesia will offer that. So don't take that 4.2 out of 15 necessarily as the final nail in the proverbial coffin that it seems like. And on that note, that is the end of the video. There's really nothing more that I can think of to say about Thymesia. So congratulations, you've reached the end of the video. If you've played Thymesia yourself, please leave any comments in the comment section below. Or I am perfectly willing to take requests. Leave any requests for games that you'd really like to see on the channel in the comments section. And for more of these highly objective reviews, subscribe to 7th Circle Gaming, and goodbye.